to wasmCloud Wednesday for February 5th. Let me go ahead and share the agenda for today. We've got a couple of things to go through. A couple really good. I expect to have some really good discussion across the community call today, and then we'll do kind of a regularly scheduled check-in. So we are going to pull the rug out from under this agenda and reorder things. We're actually going to start with the discussion on workload identity. Jonas is going to be taking us through yeah, lots of things about workload identity, what it means, what it may look like for Wasm Cloud, things like that. I don't want to spoil too much. And then Taylor is going to take, I think there's a demo, I'm not sure, at least a discussion of the some updates and upgrades to Wash plugins. You remember that Taylor authored the original RFC on Wash plugins text-based demo. Great. And there's some thoughts going forward. So without talking a little bit anymore, whatever, Jonas, would you like to go through, all I've said basically is workload identity. I think you
Yeah.
have some educational material. So yeah, take it away.
Yeah, I put together a few slides just to kind of talk through this a little bit more. And I will press share. Let's see, or slideshow. I don't know how this is going to show up, so let me know. I don't know if I can see the preview anywhere. Does that show up anywhere? Okay, you can see it. Can you see it okay?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Right. So workload identity. Well, let me just kind of skip on to the first slide. So, workload identity, for anybody who's not familiar with workload identity, the workload identity is essentially this concept of providing your services, your applications, a form of identity from the platform that they're running on. And so it's essentially kind of becoming known as non-human identity, I guess, to contrast it with the actual humans. So there's many forms of workload identity across the industry, and it's fairly common now from different cloud providers, for example, to have a built-in set of primitives that they offer you that vend workload identity. And then also platforms like Kubernetes and Nomad, for example, have a form of workload identity built into them. So it only makes sense that wasmCloud would also start looking at providing a form of workload identity. And so a couple of interesting or important things to call out as workload identity pertains to wasmCloud. We want it to be infrastructure agnostic because wasmCloud runs across many different environments, from edge to cloud to on-prem to IoT. And so we don't want this to be tied to a specific type of infrastructure, so we cannot make use of the workload identity as issued by a given platform that we're running on. So for example, we couldn't make this something that depended on, let's say, AWS or Google Cloud or Azure, but because we want it to work across all of them. We want this to be something that's based on standards. It's important that it's interoperable with other platforms that or I should say across platforms where we might be running in multiple different places. And so let's say we had a cluster that was, spread across at edge and cloud. We want those two to be able to talk to each other through this form of workload identity. It's important that it's cryptographically verifiable in that it is you can say that the workload as it presents its identity is actually the work. You can validate that it is the workload that it says it is. This is kind of like a core tenet of workload identity. And to the extent that it's possible, it should be fully automated in that the workloads themselves running on wasmCloud should not have to do anything other than request the identity for it to be available for them. So let's talk a little bit about sort of the immediate use cases that might come to mind when we're talking about workload identity. So what are some of the places where we might want to be able to make use of this? So the first place is securing the NATS connectivity for both the host, wasmCloud host itself, but also providers, because they both need to talk to the NATS that powers your cluster. It is important that there's a way for that to be secured. And there's a couple different ways we can handle this, but that's kind of as a foundational thing, like in order to get anything else going, you basically need NATS connectivity, and it would be really fantastic. That was secured by this workload ID. Then what we're a as I was thinking about this, a use case that came to mind is something that we have some open issues around already, is the ability to do essentially dynamic OCI artifact pulls. So when you're deploying a component or a provider, it'd be fantastic if the host didn't actually have to have a hard-coded set of credentials stored for those pulls, but instead it could present the workload ID that it has been issued as a way to authenticate the OCI artifact with the OCI artifact registry. And similarly, for accessing third-party resources, so for example, you can imagine you're running on AWS and you want to talk to you have a blob store provider that wants to talk to S3. It would be fantastic if the blob store provider could present its workload identity to AWS, and that would be the way that it can get access to AWS without having to have any kind of secrets stored in the definition for the provider. And then down the line, there's use cases such as establishing mutual authentication between the hosts and the providers. So there might be a provider that has an endpoint that the host wants to talk to. Today, these interactions all happen over NATs, but in the future, they could also happen through other means. And so establishing a foundation where we can have a mutual TLS being created, essentially a cryptograph, authenticated tunnel between the providers and the hosts. And then when we step back and think about having multiple clusters deployed across clouds or different environments, it'd be wonderful if those clusters could establish essentially a trust relationship with each other through presenting their respective workload identities. So if you've spent any time in this space, you might have come across something called SPIFFE. And SPIFFE is essentially the kind of the standard, if you will, in the CNCF space for workload identity. It's been around for, I think it was announced in 2016. Work started on it, I think, in 2017. But it's one of the CNCF graduated projects, and it kind of presents a standard that you can implement for workload identity. And there's a reference implementation in the open source called Spire. And so my proposal is that we adopt SPIFFE as the standard that we build our workload identity around. And for getting started easily, the Spire ecosystem of projects will be very helpful as a way to bootstrap workload identity for wasmCloud. And so kind of how do we go about workload identity? And so there's essentially 3 areas we need to cover. So for any of this to be possible, we have to start with the host. The host itself has to have a way to obtain workload identity for itself, but also the workloads that are running on top of it, such as components and providers. So that's kind of like the first step. After that, we can kind of decide the components and providers that aren't necessarily tied to each other, but from a use cases perspective, I think it makes more sense to start with implementing workload identity on the provider side, because there are some ready to go use cases where providers could, if they had the ability to use workload identity or then themselves get workload identity, they could be used immediately. And then components themselves also should have the ability to request workload identity, because there will be similar use cases there that will want to be able to support. I saw there was a question. I'll jump to that. Just double check if there's anything. Oh, yeah. Thanks, Taylor. Yes, there's a profit step there somewhere. Number 5, I think. Absolutely. And then in terms of, oops, sorry, go ahead. Is there something? Somebody had a comment? No? Okay. In terms of what's next, so initially I'm working on getting a proposal for this together, presenting in the community issue tracker, the wasmCloud tracker, sorry. And then following that up with a POC demonstration of how the initial host integration might look like. So I'm already working on kind of a proof of concept that shows how we establish NATS connectivity for using workload identity. And then once we have agreement on the proposal, I'll also create a tracking issue with the work that needs to be done, outline on there for the initial scoping of the workload identity. I'm sure as we kind of get further along, new things will pop up, new use cases will come up, and things like that, which is great. But I think it's important to kind of lay out the initial what it would look like to initially roll it out across the host, provider, and components. So that's yeah, that's me. Oh, and I do have as an extra motivator, I do have a so OWASP recently, I don't know if this is the first time they've done this, but recently they published, sorry, a non-human identity top 10. So maybe I should just click into this. I promise these are safe. I made these just before the call. So this is a set of essentially non-human identity, so machines doing things, risks. I haven't gone through the entire list and kind of qualified whether or not this would be something that would be addressed or can be addressed through workload identity. But I will certainly include as part of the proposal a set of section for motivating this is a non-trivial number of these. So probably over half of these can be addressed through workload identity or form of workload identity. So the idea is to basically say, provide a way to explain like, hey, these are known problems that have, like, this is based on their research, right? These are known problems that are plagued the industry or are problematic across the industry. And so if we introduce workload identity, we can start solving for these risks across wasmCloud deployments for folks who are deploying with workload identity in mind. So yeah, just a little bit of extra motivation, I guess. So yeah, that's workload identity. If we have any questions, I'm happy to answer. But otherwise, I'll follow up with an RFC, and hopefully next week I can actually even show a little bit of the host in action doing this, acting on this. So yeah. I should also mention that Colin and I are going to be talking about this at KubeCon. So a little bit of extra motivation there.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Brooks.
Got to get it done. Get it all working. It has to be done completely. And XDS as well. Let's get it all. Sorry.
Yeah, I did have a question, but I guess I'll put Colin on the spot. Colin, is there anything else that you wanted to, since you guys are doing the talk about it, anything else that you want to say around workload identity?
Yeah, let's just do the whole talk. I'm kidding. Yeah, don't even come to KubeCon. No, I mean, yeah, so Spiffy is something that has solved a lot of problems professionally for me in the past, and was a big thing when Istio came out. Was that if we all recall to the before times with early Istio, especially, I mean, it's still part of Istio, but that was one of the key features of Istio. Was that it provided workload identity into Kubernetes, which had no concept of workload identity. And especially people who are used to, this is like where the real strength of wasmCloud can be is it's nice for small companies, but I really feel like it's huge for big companies, because this is a problem that if you're using if you're using service IDs with certificates that need to be rotated for every microservice to microservice transaction. I know this is just like, well, Istio solves this, but most people don't actually use Istio for this. So I feel like with this blank page of wasmCloud, of getting people to move workloads into wasmCloud, I think it's a real benefit to have this just included. This be part of, I don't have to worry about service tokens. I don't, so yeah, I mean, that's the motivation piece. And it does tie into, there's a lot that this ties into with like how we want to control, what we might want is as some sort of a control plane for wasmCloud, well, how we want to integrate with things like Envoy with XDS or whatever. Like, this is definitely just part of that. There's a lot here, like, that we can to kind of to build on and make sure it all integrates in. And if we get it right, it's going to be awesome, and we will, because everything we do is awesome, especially you guys.
We had Florian next.
Yeah, hi, many thanks. So first of all, thanks for this great idea. So I am really interested in that as well. So it's also still, I would say, not completely standard in Kubernetes, for example. So even if it's actually well established, but not broadly used, I would say. So interesting. But the question is, would this be optional maybe? Because if it's mandatory and not optional, for example, it would have introduce a huge dependency, right, for operating wasmCloud actually. And then the follow-up question to that would be actually already, would your RFC also cover some best practices how to operate Spire, for example, like we have it on wasm.com for nuts, or also some guidance here?
Uh, Great questions. So I'll answer the first one first and then go with the second one. So the goal is to definitely make this optional, as in for if your deployment doesn't require, if you don't want workload innate, that's totally fine. I agree with you that this has a fairly sizable footprint addition to what your core wasmCloud deployment might look like, because there's a lot of moving pieces to make sure that everything's working. So we definitely aren't planning on making this like a requirement, but it is added on as an additional feature that if you want to turn it on, you can. Similar to how you can do this with other platforms as well. As far as the operating Spire, I think we'll have to defer to a lot of that to the actual Spire community. We'll certainly include as much guidance as we can out of the box, but I think a lot of the sort of deep knowledge will live within the Spire community, the Spiffy and Spire community. And there's a fair amount of community documentation and talks that have been done around how people who've adopted Spire at scale. For example, Uber uses their entire identity plane is operated on using Spire, and they issue about 16 or 160 million identities a month or active. They have active identities, I should say. So there's going to be a lot of that will lean into as kind of the point people at, like the experts, so to speak. But certainly we'll do our very best to provide the guidance in terms of getting it going and operationalizing it, and what are the things to consider. And where possible, I think we'll also recommend offloading some of the harder things like database management to a managed provider, if that's an option available to you, so that you're not having to take on a whole lot of operational burden on top of running wasmCloud itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think Istio's done a pretty good job with it. So I don't know where we're going to end up, but I feel like people have been using Envoy and Istio. Istio, there is Spiffy in Istio. It's if you do nothing, it's a self-signed certificate, right? Which isn't going to be great, for a real production deployment. But I think they've done a pretty good job. I just think it's still Kubernetes, and it's Envoy is not a part of Kubernetes the way that wasmCloud. There's enough, like this is I don't know. I'm just trying to like reiterate again that if we do it well, people are just going to have this thing, and it's going to be super easy to get going. So that it almost be like default. I mean, I think at some point we might not have NATs be required for wasmCloud, right? But NATs with wasmCloud is nice, and that's it's a good way to it's like how we do it. So I'd like to be similar to Spiffy as well eventually.
Okay, many
Yeah,
thanks.
that was actually. Oh, sorry, Florian.
Oh, my bad. Sorry.
That was actually going to be my question for Colin or Jonas. Is it seems like, well, in the spirit of non-breaking changes and things, this would be something that's additive that you can kind of opt into from the initial feature. I guess that's a statement, but I mean it more as a question. And then in your ideal world, do you see this being something that is just on by default or required in like in a wasmCloud 2.0? Potentially spicy thought, but kind of curious on your
I
view of
think
the world there.
yeah, I think like an auto-generated certificate authority that just kind of out of the box runs with wash up. But just seemingly like I think Istio has done a good job with it. So that's what they do. So I mean, not everybody likes Istio, so maybe, but at least in terms of this, I feel like they've done a good job. So I think that we would want to follow that path unless there's a good reason not to, but that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, I think there's I'm going to focus for the short term on like introducing this as an optional feature. I think our experience getting this out there and getting people using it will inform how we want to move forward as a project in terms of broader adoption, whether it becomes just an ambient capability that's always on, regardless of whether you use it or not, or something that you have to opt into. Something that I think makes sense also to keep an open mind to is there by adopting Spiffy as the standard, we also have the option of or rather end users will have the option to also potentially offload Spiffy management itself to third-party services, because there are a number of companies that exist and are working on actual managed options that do provide Spiffy as a foundation. So if that's an option for folks, they might be able to go through that route. But certainly in the open source, we're trying to minimize it's my goal to minimize the footprint in terms of what you have to maintain and still get the benefits from the platform. So I think that'll be something that as we get more experience from the field, we can make informed decisions on like how to best move forward with the feature.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Yeah, we certainly have the kind of initial burden is maybe the wrong word, but like the need as soon as you move off local, because we do it for you on local to set up NATS infrastructure. So there already is something that you need to create and configure. Seems hard to want to add like more and more into that. Starts to wade into the you need a provisioning type tool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's it's a problem. As I said, kind of like it's really like it's an enterprise kind of a problem. It's definitely an enterprise type problem. Once you have lots of services, you do need to manage what can talk to what, and then integrating in with things like Envoy or other proxies, which I think we would want to be able to do. Like that, those that you're gonna have some sort of workload identity to. I feel like it solves a lot of things that we have kind of aspirations for.
I
But
will
maybe it is an
say,
enterprise only, I think.
yeah, no, I think you're right. I will say the nice thing about building specifically against Spiffy as opposed to Spire is that it allows us to also implement additional or alternative backends for the implementation. So we could have something that was more, for example, local host friendly or development friendly, that was much more lightweight, kind of fully integrated. The goal is to start with sort of the Spire ecosystem of software, because it's not, I wouldn't reinvent that wheel lightly, but I think as we get better understanding of what parts are hard about operationalizing it and what parts of it could be integrated more directly into a wasmCloud. For example, I think the Spire agent is actually primed to be just completely integrated into the wasmCloud host, in that the host takes over the responsibilities of what Spire agent is normally used for. I think that's one of the opportunities for simplifying the operational burden on folks. And then we can assess what the more of the control plane side of it might look like down the line. But
Yeah,
I certainly would want that to be fully motivated by the experience we get from end users.
and kind of like I think we also have to differentiate OIDC too. Like I think we need to explain that concept in our KubeCon talk, because this is kind of a broader thing, as well. So just a note to self and Joe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I really look forward to and don't let me cut anybody off who has questions. Feel free to just jump in, raise your hand. But I'm looking forward to seeing this working and like what it looks like from the beginning. So this is great. Yeah. So speaking of, folks have any other questions on workload identity for now? Alrighty. Thank you, Jonas, for coming on and doing educational pre-work for workload identity. It's a huge help to have it presented like in this way in the wasmCloud lens. And Colin, looking forward to both of you guys doing the talk. Okay, so moving on to the next item on our agenda, I will share. Whoa. Jonas, having a party over there. I will share the agenda super briefly before handing it over. Demo and discussion, text-based demo on Wash plugins and I guess some of the big brain thing or whatever galaxy brain things we've been thinking about for a little bit. Without spoiling too much, Taylor, would you like to talk more?
Yes, I can talk more. Me talk good. Taylor talked. Okay, so I'm linking the issue that I'm going to pull up in here, just for everybody to see. And like I said, this is just text-based. Okay, you're seeing my browser window with the plugin wash, right? Okay, I'm making sure. It didn't look like I clicked the right one. Okay, so this is, I just opened RFC. I've been working on it for a little while. I've been talking to various maintainers about it for the last little bit. One of the things we've talked about for a long time is that Wasm is a great and should be, if it evolves the way we want it to evolve, should be the last plugin system you'll ever need. And so we've talked for a long time about pluginifying Wash. And that means turning large chunks of the functionality of that Wash into plugins that can then be updated independently as needed for Wash. The main motivation here is that there's the obvious thing of we want to dog food this, right? Like we want to be using components, we want to see where things are at, try them out, find the rough edges, all that kind of thing. But also, we have lots of people who are starting to productionize wasmCloud and use things, and there's a certain amount of flexibility that's needed here. There's things like auth plugins and things you'd want to hook into whatever system you're working with for your developers or whatever it might be. There could be custom extensions and things people want to add in for their personal thing in like their internal platform for whatever they're building with wasmCloud. All of these things are also a common use case we're seeing. And so this serves the two purposes of A, breaking up like Wash into some smaller pieces that can then be, like I said, iterated on independently, and then also those other things I just mentioned. So this is an RFC proposing that, and it goes into great detail that I hope will be informative, so people can read through it and see if you think it's good or not. So essentially, what this boils down to is there's a few required changes that we're going to make. And the biggest thing is going to be around the interfaces and what Wash is providing to plugins. You can read through each of the WITs here. I'll kind of give an overview. We're going to rename the subcommand interface to plugin, and all plugin. Rex, did you want to interrupt before I go into this?
I just wanted to ask if you could zoom in just a little bit.
Oh, right. Hold on. Enhance. How do I get you gone, sidebar? You should be gone. Okay, whatever.
Yeah, it was just it was okay with the text, but maybe just a little hard to read the widths, so continue.
Okay, bigger width. So this is going to now be the plugin interface, and it supports both kinds of plugins. There is just like the standard plugin, which was the subcommand plugin before, and then also an auth plugin.
Very inflated on the ground, very rapid.
Liam, did you? Okay, sorry, Liam.
Yeah, we got it.
Okay, good. Thank you. So, this thing has the ability to return it back. So this is the metadata thing. This is how a plugin can basically tell Wash what it does and what it registers with. We'll talk about things like what this access request thing is, and what it's able to do. The big change here is that before we tried to be helpful, and you could say like, oh, here's my flags and my my arguments that could be passed to this. But in terms of maximum flexibility, that doesn't really scale. So basically, all argument parsing is now delegated to plugins. It gives more flexibility, a little bit less nice of an experience when you're like listing the help commands from like a top level. But anyway, so that's not the massive change. Those are called out here. The big thing is this new auth interface. And this auth interface, so auth plugins are in charge of two different things. First, they allow you to perform login flows, which is abstracted behind a single authenticate method. And then I'll explain how you can kind of tweak some of those things. And it returns back two different types of credentials. One is a NATS credential, which is a seed and a JWT. Most people who've been in the wasmCloud space are very familiar with that at this point. The token is an optional thing because you can do auth callouts via NATS, and that's a common integration pattern, especially if people have existing authentication systems and they're using the NATS thing. So there's an optional token which is used in those flows. A token-based thing is we've always talked about having HTTP shims and other things, so I'm keeping it in there for the purposes of future evolution, where you might have HTTP-based authentication and you need just a bearer token. So that's what this authentication flow does. Related to that, because many of these auth plugins will have to do an OIDC flow. OIDC flows, even with P3, are going to kind of be a little bit janky to start off with because you have to basically do the request, and then you have to spin up an HTTP server that listens for the callback URL. And so what we're doing is abstracting that behind a interface that will be provided by Wash. And so it's OIDC specific for now. If people need OAuth, we can add an OAuth specific one since it's basically the same thing. I mean, I know the differences. We're not going to go into that right now, but the whole thing is that you have the ways of configuring it, and then you automatically pass this. Oops, I forgot to remove this. I'll edit that. So you'll just do the authentication with with this, and it'll have all the issuer URL and everything in the config. And then Wash will take care of sending out that flow, waiting for spinning up a local host, and then inserting that into the request, and then waiting for the response to come back, and then it returns back the tokens that you expect. So that will be there so people can do OAuth flows from inside of the plugins. Another thing we'll need for normal plugins is the ability to push and pull from OCI. All of these interfaces, by the way, are not set in stone. I'm using them as just general, like I've actually written them out in like a WIT directory ready to go on this work, but I know they might change, especially as we start implementing. So this just gives some things. As we continue to implement some of these things, we might have to change these interfaces or talk about more that's available. You'll see here, the easiest way to see like the big high level changes is we've now we'll have the sub command world, which is your main plugin world. I might rename that world as well. And you'll see that the big change is that we import registry and we export plugin, and then we export the wasmCLI run just like we did before. The auth one is a little bit different in that we don't include all of the wasmCLI imports, but we include things like the environment, outgoing handler, random file system, and clocks for stuff that we need, and then OIDC, and then a new thing called context, which will show below here, and then it exports the plugin interface for registration, and then the auth interface for invocations. Wash context we're going to need to update the Wash context to include two new things. One's a field describing the auth plugin that is used for that context, and the second one is basically an additional field that's just a map string that allows for additional data that can be passed to those auth plugins. So that could be additional data that needs to be configured by that plugin, and it's specific to that context. That could be like account names or IDs or anything like that. And so what will happen is that any auth plugin where the context the current context is using that plugin, it will be passed via the interface. So you're able to fetch it and pull it out just using get context so that you have access to the current context as well. To be able to support plugins and support things like basically security and sandboxing around this, we will have to introduce a new wash config file. The good thing is the way I've proposed this is we're not going to do it via, most people shouldn't have to edit their config file by default. So you don't have to edit that to set up wash to get started. There are a couple things like the default auth plugin, which will just be the same file-based auth we have now. We'll replace it with what we've got. And then we this is still I'm still deciding exact syntax here. I'm thinking about globs and thinking about other things, but essentially you have like a set of allowed paths that are allowed globally. So any plugin would be able to have access to these paths and have access to specific environment variables. Um, and then you have plugin config for each thing. And so each plugin, you would have the plugin ID, and then you'll have the things like, oh, I can say like there's this mvar is allowed, these paths are allowed, and this config is the additional config for that plugin to use that's passed into the plugin. Um, that's actually the interface I forgot to add. That any plugin can get its current config, which I will add that interface into this shortly. So this is going to be basically we're going to have during wash plugin install. You saw those access requests above in the plugin thing. A plugin can hint and say, I would like access to these resources. And so it then becomes more like a standard experience on a lot of machines nowadays where it says, this app would like to have access to your microphone. So it's a similar thing to that. And that will be interactive by default. If you want to do non-interactive, we'll have different flags that allow you to do to like accept those things or deny those things, or you can configure them on your own. But basically, by default, like the plugins can prompt what it needs to. So um, we're going to make sure this is backwards compatible. We'll still support the old version um, of the plugin interface. As far as we know, there's not a lot of people who have written Wash plugins. The last one, if you have built something big and you're dependent on it, please let us know so that we can make sure we adjust anything. But we'll probably support it for 2 additional versions before completely removing the old 0.10 version and moving on to the 0.20 version. Um, I cover that here. We have the security concerns here. I have a couple of additional suggestions about what else we should always pass through or allow access to. The big thing here to note is I tried to break down like what the initial things are. And I built these in such a way that we can do it and kind of prove out the work and make sure this is going to work for everybody. So wash drain and wash keys are pretty standalone. They don't require a lot of additional effort. So seeing if we can replace those shows that like the basic thing works. And then when we start doing like wash context and an auth plugin, we start to test the other things and then other functionality like wash pull and wash push. Um, basically if we can work through those, I think we can feel fairly confident that it will work out. We're not trying to replace everything all in one go. We're just trying to replace some things about how to do this. There's some stretch goals here, but these will also fall into any like future work um, that uh, that we can do later. So the other thing here is how we're going to distribute. And after talking around that, our best option here is we want this to basically appear pretty much seamless to anyone downloading Wash. So by default, the default build of Wash will have the plugins embedded inside of it by default. That will make it so that you don't have to install anything. People can just pull it down without thinking about it. But the part of the future work is that we can have like a clean/light build of Wash where you can basically assemble your own with whatever plugins you want to install there. And there's some future like commands and things we can try doing. So that's basically the overview here of everything that's going on. So like I said, text-based demo, nothing really exciting because I had to write tons of wit and consider a bunch of things. And even with that, I forgot to put one of them in there. So I'll be updating that soon. But that's basically the overview. I'm really curious to get people's thoughts and things on this. Anyway, so yeah, Masood, you have a question?
Yeah, the idea is great. I have used the plugin framework and it's kind of clunky to use. A question that I have and a limitation that I faced was that I was trying to mimic some open source commands, and some of them are, let's say, multi-tier subcommands. So you
Yes.
might have more than one subcommand, right?
Uh-huh.
And this was forcing me to, just have one subcommand. And it ended up creating a situation of text parsing and those sorts of things to kind of try to mimic the behavior of the a source command, right? So I'm saying
Yes.
that would there be more flexibility here in the building the command structure?
Yes, that is what here is that we've removed the arguments and flags field. So the first draft was like, let's try to make sure this is integrated pretty seamlessly. And so what that was for was to make it so that I could like literally, you can see in the wash code, it pulls it in and attaches it to the clap um, argument structs and everything. In this case, the parsing is delegated entirely. So I mean, even before, but even more so now, the whole point of having it expose the in the world, um, the WASI CLI run was that you could technically run this as a normal CLI. And so what I just am proposing here is that we move away from anything with the arguments. We just say you get to parse all the arguments. So that means you can have multiple nested subcommands and all the things you'd expect um, as if it were just running like a normal CLI. So that is the goal, is to make it more flexible. And like things like those first couple of commands I suggested we do, like wash keys, have multiple subcommands, and so we'll be able to prove that out and make sure it isn't too clunky.
Awesome. Can I kind of ask for something else
Yeah.
related? This auth plugin seems very useful also for the host. I know that there might be, there seems to be some overlaps with that workload identity plugin. But imagine instances, if we consider providers today that want to talk to NATs, each of them should have that configuration defined for them, versus they could have just asked, for example, based on their ID, that give me the credentials for NATs and they could connect to it. So reducing the amount of boilerplate that needs to be built for each provider to be able to authenticate.
Yeah, those are definitely in the future. Like we've talked about wanting for a long time, like providers to be able to be Wasm as well as Wasm matures. Um, those are all kinds of things we could definitely reuse. I will say right now it's very much targeted at the wash use case. But this will probably be prior art we can refactor into, the next version, like a 0.30 of this interface that could be more reusable and modular. But yeah, this is just something that's like targeted mostly at wash right now. Bricks?
Yeah, Taylor, I think that's pretty good context. Like looking at the registry and auth and like all of these interfaces, that it's all basically inspired by a subset of all of like the capability that Wash needs to work, like the Wash subcommands that we have. Um, I had a fun question. I don't know if you thought about it yet, but like, you know, after this is all landed and it's beautiful and we have Wash plugins, right? And I am a wasmCloud developer. I want to add a new subcommand to Wash. Do you think that what do you think we'll want to encourage from a contributing perspective? Will we want to encourage that new subcommands come in as plugins if possible, or start it out in Rust just as native code and then kind of refactor it to a plugin once we've used it for a little while? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that one.
Yeah, so I mean, I personally would say that if this is successful, then the thing we'd encourage people to do is if you want to add a new subcommand to wash, you would start it as a plugin. And if it becomes something that's common enough, it could become a community plugin. Um, the thing I'm looking forward to here is I mean, and I think I've said this before, but like I greatly prefer writing CLIs in Go as opposed to Rust, but because of all the WebAssembly tooling and things that exist better in Rust, a lot of this has been in Rust, and then when we created it, it was Rust. And so there's things that in the future, like we could maybe write some of these things easier in something like Go, compile them down to, the component that we can use. For what it's worth, these first things we're going to keep in Rust to keep them as tiny and streamlined as possible, since they'll be embedded into the main wash binary. But I think the thing is it gives that flexibility of being able to use whatever language the contributors is comfortable with to try out a plugin. And then also it allows us to try out things without like forcing us to rev wash. So now when we're starting to like harmonize some of the API things and stuff that's going on. So rather than having to, rev all of wash, I mean, we will right now because the control interface is out of scope right now for this because we're making those changes. But like, imagine a future where we want to change that or try out a new thing or add support for a new experimental API. We can do that without revving all of wash. And so that's why I think pushing people towards that's the better option if this all works out. Like I said, it's built to let us know if it's going to be a bad idea as we do it.
Yeah, that was, I guess, going to be my next question. So if we wanted to push out a new version of, what's a good example for this? Just recently, Luke on the wasmCloud maintainer side added support for embedding WIT into a provider archive, which is an awesome feature, and we've wanted to do it for a little while. So thank you, Luke, if you're watching. Um, that's like a new feature. Feasibly, if we could do it all in a plugin, we could just like update that one individual plugin. Is that what we would encourage people to do? Some kind of like wash plugin update to pull down all the Simver compatible latest changes for those things? Would we still maybe just rev the CLI? I guess what I'm getting at is if it's all plugins, then we could probably get away with not doing a lot of core wash releases.
That is a nice knock-on effect here. Like that was part of the secret plan, of why we've always talked about doing this. And let me check the current watch plugin. Yeah, the watch plugin command currently has install and uninstall, and I know that install can update. But like it'd be good as we improve this to be able to do like wash plugin update. And then just have that be able to look through all your plugins and try to go fetch the latest version. Um, from OCI. I mean, that obviously would require that people pushing these plugins into OCI would have Semver compatible tags on it. So, there's all that stuff that goes along with it. But the nice thing is that, and that's what we kind of have encouraged so far with it. But yeah, I would want that to be something where we can update those things a lot quicker and out of band. Um, so anyway, the reason this is we've had this on our minds for a long time. The two big things are this shows off the power of Wasm really well, and as a Wasm project, that's a good thing. And it gives us this flexibility to add these whatever extensions and experiment with things a lot faster, rather than becoming, kind of the kitchen sink of tools, which is great given its name of Wash. But that's that's kind of the main things I see here. Hey, anything else? Hey, that's it then.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Taylor. This is also awesome. I look forward to this being outside of a text-based demo. Which one, sorry, which one did you say you would be a good candidate to do first? Like basically, if you have all this place, which one would you start with just to prove it out?
The two I'm starting with to prove it out are wash drain and wash keys because I know that the nkeys library um, embedded into a component. And I also know that drain is just accessing file systems. So it basically tests the access requests. It tests the ability to write out keys to a specific directory, so it tests kind of like those basic features. And then after that, if we do like wash context as a plugin and then like an auth plugin that replaces our current loading from wash contexts, um, that will like though like that plugin will also just accept the same wash mvars that currently exist and like lets us test that. Then wash pull and push lets us test um the example like or sorry, not the example, the registry interfaces to see if like abstracting those things behind those interfaces works okay. Um and then I know that like we might just also experiment for fun, just an auth plugin using like OIDC and just see what happens, just to make sure that it works. I just want to make sure as we do it, like we can back out. If we find out it's terrible, we can back it out, and then we can iterate also over the interfaces. But like I think we'll be able to do this fairly well, and then Wash just eventually becomes like a customized Wasm time host that runs the things with like and provides the like basic functionality for all these plugins to use. Um, but that's obviously like a long tail of stuff we got to do to get there.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. Well, hey, we have just about 5 minutes left. That is enough time to run through some of the latest and greatest things that we've done on the wasmCloud roadmap. So I'll just do kind of a quick update here. As a reminder, everybody can see this roadmap that we planned on the wasmCloud organization. Should all be public and everything. Nobody's told me that it's not, so tell me if it's not. Um, Taking a look, we have been moving things out of triage and into the ready for work stage really, really well. So just kind of like wrapping up some of the information gathering, planning around some of the either bigger or tasks that we know that we want to fix, but not sure exactly how. So going through those discussions on the maintainer side, which is great. So again, just as a reminder for all the folks who are looking to either contribute to wasmCloud for the first time or looking to kind of get back in and get your feet wet with good issues, these ones in the Ready for Work tab under improvement are all pretty well scoped, pretty well contained to be a good first issue. So, low to medium level of effort, but high impact because it's on the roadmap. So, great place to look. Some of these are getting taken by some of our awesome contributors and maintainers, like Aditya on the cron job provider, who I saw you and Taylor talking about some design things in that issue. So that's pretty great to see. And Masood on the built-in HTTP client provider. Taking a look at what is in progress. We did talk last time about moving this phase one of the SBOM and build provenance for wasmCloud artifacts feature over, which is kind of the a sub issue of the broader RFC. So thank you, Masood or OSS Bello for working on that. A PR did come in, Ahmed, who is on the call, let's go, for consolidating Wash CLI and Wash lib. That is, looks like kind of a work in progress draft. It looks like it's functionally pretty done. There's just going to be some workspace pains that come along with it. So, I did want to mention because we talked about it last week, and Ahmed, I shouldn't be surprised anymore, but since you kind of knocked it out so quickly, if you all are looking at taking on any larger issues or fixes for Wash or Wash lib, I would ask maybe just to, feel free to get started, but just to be prepared to help integrate that into the new Wash crate come maybe a little bit later this week. I just don't want it to be too hard to port all of those. I don't want it to be too hard to port all of those new commits over to the Wash crate. But that one is awesome to see essentially kind of coming across. Bundling wasmCloud and Wash, we did do the initial spike on that. There hasn't been any more movement there. That was something that I was working on, but just to give you that status update. And then under completed, this one may have slipped under the radar because CI, but I just want to thank Roman for doing a ton of work here on first on the wasmCloud crate features, which essentially allows you to drop into our wasmCloud workspace, run a cargo build, and based on the features that you provide, will build different individual libraries in the workspace. So if you wanted to build everything, you can enable all the features, it'll build all the providers, super nice simplification, or you can also turn them all off and only enable wasmCloud just to build the wasmCloud binary. And then integrating well into that with our Nix Flake outputs. Now we can take advantage of that by using Nix and our CI only build specific binaries when we need to. So our CI has gotten quite a bit faster. It's gotten broken out into individual binaries for when we do builds. If you take a look at the matrix, it's gotten kind of where is it? It's gotten kind of hilarious if you look at it, but this is all awesome and doing a great job at some of the things that we wanted to optimize for quite a long time, not just for CI speed and organization, but also because the less compute resources that we use, the greener we are being in terms of like ethically using CI pipelines. So that's great. May as well optimize for that where we can. That I think is kind of a good summary of where we're at on the roadmap. We're about well, truly through the quarter, we're about a month in. But we did do this roadmap planning I believe 3 weeks ago now. So we're making great progress. Great job, everybody who's coming in and contributing and getting these things across the line. I think this is going great. And of course, there's been plenty of other things that have come up outside of the roadmap as well that we've gotten done. So, yeah, thank you for coming to your sprint planning meeting, everybody. Great job, great work. uh, yeah, so good, great. Do folks have any other questions, comments, concerns about the wasmCloud roadmap and where we're at? Alrighty. Everybody's favorite thing, CIs and roadmaps. Well, I think that just about does it for today then. I think I can hang on for a little bit longer after the stream if folks had any other questions, but for now, I think say thank you and hope everybody has a great wasmCloud